On April 26, 1986, at 1:23 in the morning, Reactor number 4 at Chernobyl unleashed, in just a few seconds, a force that no one there believed possible. And the man who ran to put it out had no idea he was running straight toward the most dangerous thing humanity had ever created. His name, let's call him that, was Anatoly, one of the firefighters on duty in Pripyat, a brand new, modern city built from scratch to house the workers of the power plant. He was in his early 20s, with a wife and plans. And a siren that rang out at 1:29 in the morning changed everything. The plant sat just 4 kilometers from the city. Anatoly and the first 9 firefighters on duty climbed into the truck without knowing the one thing that mattered, that they were not going to put out an ordinary fire. They were driving toward an open nuclear reactor, and no one had told them. To understand what happened that night, you have to go back a few hours. It all began with a safety test. Yes, a test meant to make the plant safer was the exact thing that destroyed it. The idea seemed reasonable. If external power failed, the pumps that cooled the reactor would need about a minute before the diesel generators took over. The test asked a simple question. During that gap of a minute, could the momentum of the spinning turbine itself keep the water circulating? That's what they set out to measure. But the test was delayed for hours and ended up falling to the night shift, a crew that had never been trained for it. To run the test, they had to bring the reactor's power way down. And that's where the first mistake opened the door to disaster. The power plunged to almost zero, far lower than planned. The reactor nearly died. To revive it, the operators did something reckless. They pulled out almost all the control rods, the parts that slow the nuclear reaction. Out of 211 rods, they left only a handful inside the core. And here is the secret the Soviet government hid for years. The Chernobyl reactor was a type called RBMK, and it had a grave design flaw. Under certain conditions, instead of calming itself down, it sped itself up. Engineers called it a positive void coefficient. In plain terms, when the water cooling the reactor began turning to steam, the reaction didn't ease off. It intensified. More steam, more power. More power, more steam. A loop that fed on itself. A bomb waiting for the right moment. And the operators didn't grasp the true scale of the danger. At 1:23 and 40 seconds, sensing that something was wrong, an operator pressed the emergency button, the AZ5, to drive all the control rods back in and shut the reactor down instantly. It was the button that was supposed to save everything. But there was one more hidden flaw. The tips of the control rods were made of graphite, a material that, in the first instant, instead of breaking the reaction, accelerated it. The emergency button, designed to shut the reactor down, gave it the final push. Within seconds, the power spiked to more than 100 times normal. Hold on to that detail. The very button of salvation was the trigger of catastrophe, and in the next few minutes, ordinary men like Anatoly would pay for mistakes they didn't even know existed. What came next lasted less than a minute. The heat surged. The water flashed to steam in a fraction of a second, and the pressure inside the core became impossible to contain. The first explosion was steam. It lifted the reactor's lid, a 1,000-ton structure, the weight of hundreds of cars, like the lid of a cooking pot. 2 or 3 seconds later came a second explosion, even more violent, estimated at something like 225 tons of TNT. The roof of the building was torn open. The reactor core, now exposed to the open sky, began spitting radioactive fragments into the night. Chunks of burning graphite, the very heart of the reactor, landed scattered across the plant's grounds. And no one, in that moment, understood what it meant. When Anatoly and the firefighters arrived, they found a strange kind of fire. It wasn't ordinary fuel burning. There was a bluish glow in the air, a metallic smell, and dark blocks strewn across the ground giving off an unnatural heat. Those blocks were graphite from inside the reactor. Seeing that out there should have been a sign of absolute horror. One of the surviving firefighters recalled, years later, that he recognized the graphite on the ground and understood at once where it could only have come from. He remembered joking with his colleagues in dark humor. There must be an insane amount of radiation here. We'll be lucky if we're all still alive tomorrow morning. They had no radiation protection suits. They had helmets, canvas coats, boots, the same gear as any fire. They climbed onto the roof of the neighboring building, Reactor 3, to keep the flames from spreading to the other reactors. And that, in the end, is what prevented an even greater tragedy. The radiation up on that roof was so intense that measuring it was almost pointless. Estimates speak of thousands of Roentgens per hour, in a place where just a few minutes is already a fatal dose. The firefighters tasted metal in their mouths. The skin on their faces began to heat up, as if they were standing near a sun. Why did they stay? One of them answered, years later, in a way that says everything. Of course we knew about the danger. If we'd followed the rules, we'd never have gone anywhere near the reactor. But it was a moral obligation. It was our duty. We were like kamikazes. Around 2:16 in the morning, the first firefighters on the roof began to fall ill. Their legs gave out. The nausea came, the vomiting. Anatoly and his comrades helped bring down the ones who collapsed. It was the first stage of acute radiation sickness, and they still thought they'd simply worked too hard in the heat. Within a few hours, the firefighters began to be taken to the Pripyat hospital. From there, the most exposed would fly on to Moscow. The visible fire was, for the most part, brought under control before dawn. But the real fire, the graphite burning inside the reactor, would burn for 10 days. And the worst hadn't even begun for the city sleeping next door. For kilometers away, Pripyat slept. It was a young city, with an average age of 26, parks, a brand new Ferris wheel waiting to open, nearly 50,000 people. And no one woke those people to tell them what had happened. On the morning of April 26th, life went on almost as usual. Children went to school. People hung laundry out to dry under a strong sun. Some families went fishing near the plant. What they didn't know was that the air, the sun, and the ground that day carried something invisible. There are accounts of residents who went to a railway bridge overlooking the plant at night to watch the colored glow rising from the reactor. That light in the sky was beautiful, and it was radiation ionizing the air. That's why the spot became known, years later, by a grim nickname, the Bridge of Death. It's important to say, part of this became legend, and historians debate how many were really there. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the Soviet machine did what it did best, conceal. The priority was not to warn the public. It was to control the information. The first hours, and then the first days, were ruled by official silence. The order to evacuate Pripyat didn't come until the afternoon of the next day, April 27th, about 36 hours after the explosion. 36 hours in which people breathed, ate, and drank without knowing a thing. When the evacuation finally began, it was fast and organized in a way that was frightening. More than 1,000 buses formed a line that, they say, stretched for kilometers. In just a few hours, nearly 50,000 people were pulled out of the city. They told the residents it was temporary, to take documents and the essentials for about 3 days. Grab what you need, leave the rest. They locked their doors, fed the cats, and boarded the buses thinking they'd be back the following week. Almost no one ever returned. Ever. Pripyat froze in time that day. The dolls in the nurseries, the notebooks left open in the schools, the Ferris wheel that never turned for the public. Everything stayed where it was. Today, 40 years later, the city is still there, empty, slowly being swallowed by the forest. And the world? The world only found out about the disaster by accident. At a nuclear plant in Sweden, more than 1,000 kilometers away, technicians detected abnormal radiation on their own clothes. They searched for the leak inside their own plant. They found none. The radioactive cloud had come from Chernobyl. It was Sweden, not the Soviet Union, that gave the world its first warning. Under pressure, Moscow admitted the accident in a brief notice on television 2 days later. The truth, though, would take years to come out in full. Putting out the visible fire was only the beginning. The reactor was still open, still burning, still throwing radiation into the air. To contain it, the Soviet Union summoned an army history would call the liquidators. About 600,000 people, over the following years, mobilized to clean up the impossible. They were firefighters, soldiers, miners, engineers, doctors, drivers. Ordinary people. Helicopter pilots dropped thousands of tons of sand, lead, and boron over the open reactor, flying straight above the radioactive core to try to smother it. The most remembered are the biorobots. On a section of the roof so radioactive that even remote-controlled machines broke down. The radiation fried their electronics. The robots failed. So they sent men. Each one had about 90 seconds to run out, throw a piece of graphite over the edge, and come back. 90 seconds of usable life in that place. Beneath the reactor lay an even more terrifying danger. The molten mass of the core, scalding hot, was burning downward toward reservoirs of water. If it touched the water, the steam could set off a new explosion, one that would have contaminated much of Europe. 3 volunteers stepped forward for a near-suicidal mission, to dive into the flooded basements and open the valves to drain the water. For a long time it was said the 3 had died. The truth, discovered later, is more comforting. All 3 survived the mission. And what they did in that dark basement may have saved millions of lives. Miners were called in to dig a tunnel beneath the reactor and install a cooling system, working in absurd heat, often half-naked, under radiation levels no one should ever endure. Each of those groups paid a price that would only show up years later in their bodies. And down there, in that basement, the reactor's lava cooled and hardened into a monstrous shape. Scientists nicknamed it the elephant's foot, a mass of corium, melted nuclear fuel mixed with concrete, sand, and metal, heavy, dark, and glassy. When the elephant's foot was found, months later, it was giving off about 10,000 Rankins per hour. It was so lethal that standing near it for just 5 minutes was a death sentence. The researchers who photographed it used mirrors and ran. It was, literally, one of the most dangerous things on the planet. To seal it all off, thousands of workers raised, in a matter of months, an enormous structure of concrete and steel over the reactor, the sarcophagus. Thrown up in haste, under radiation, it covered Chernobyl's open wound. But it was a temporary fix, and time would come to collect. How many people died at Chernobyl? It's one of the hardest questions in modern history, and the answer depends on how you count. Let's move carefully and honestly here, because every number is a life. The official, immediate count is about 30 to 31 direct deaths. Plant operators and firefighters who died in the following weeks, victims of acute radiation sickness. Among them, 28 of the first to arrive, including several of the firefighters who climbed onto that roof with Anatoly. One of the most remembered was a 25-year-old firefighter who died in a Moscow hospital 18 days after the disaster. His radiation dose was so high that he had to be buried in a zinc coffin, inside a wooden one, sealed shut. Stories like his turned these men into symbols of courage. But the 30 direct deaths are only the visible part. Estimates from United Nations organizations calculate that, over the decades, somewhere between 4,000 and 16,000 people may have died prematurely from the effects of radiation, cancer above all. Other studies suggest higher numbers. No one knows the exact total, and probably no one ever will. There is, however, one proven and devastating effect: thyroid cancer in children. The region's contaminated milk carried radioactive iodine into the bodies of thousands of children and teenagers. This is one of the clearest and saddest medical legacies of the disaster. And there are those who survived, but were never the same again. The firefighter whose accounts inspired this video lived for decades afterward, with scars from radiation burns, tumors removed, and weeks each year spent in the hospital. Of the roughly 28 firefighters who arrived first alongside him, more than a third had already died. Their courage did not come for free. It also has to be said, calmly, what the science shows. The effects of radiation are real and serious, but many myths have exaggerated the number of victims. To honor the dead of Chernobyl is to tell the truth, without inventing numbers, and without diminishing the pain of those who truly suffered. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes forever. Entire villages were demolished and buried. Families were torn apart. A region the size of a small country became forbidden land. That's a cost no statistic can ever measure. Around the plant, a circle was drawn, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. About 2,600 square kilometers where, in theory, no one should live. A space larger than many countries, emptied of people almost overnight. The logic was obvious. No humans, no victims. But nature didn't read the notice. And what happened in the following decades became one of the most fascinating unintentional experiments in science. With no hunting, no farms, no cities, no traffic, wildlife came back. And it didn't come back timid. It came back in force. Today, the exclusion zone is one of the largest unplanned nature reserves in Europe. Hidden cameras have captured wolves, elk, lynx, wild boar, foxes, and deer moving among abandoned buildings. Herds of rare wild horses, the Przewalski's horses, released there in the 1990s, now graze peacefully across a radioactive landscape. How is this possible if the place is contaminated? The answer unsettles scientists. For most animals, the total absence of human beings turned out to be less dangerous than the radiation itself. In other words, for wildlife, we may be worse than a nuclear disaster. But it's not a fairy tale. Researchers observe, in some species, signs of stress, higher mutation rates, reproductive problems, changes still being studied. Nature does thrive, but it pays, in silence, part of the bill. Over the old concrete sarcophagus, which was cracking and threatening to collapse, the world built one of the largest movable structures ever made by engineering, the new safe confinement. A gigantic steel arch, assembled beside the reactor and slid over it in 2016, designed to contain Chernobyl for 100 years. And there's still a recent shadow. In 2022, war passed through the exclusion zone. Forest fires linked to military activity swept across part of the forests, and scientists reported fallen trees and dead animals. 40 years on, Chernobyl remains a place where history refuses to stop happening. Why does Chernobyl still haunt us, for decades later? Because it wasn't the work of chance, nor of a monster. It was the sum of terribly human things. A reactor with hidden flaws, a culture of silence, pressure to meet deadlines, and the certainty that this could never happen here. The RBMK flaw that killed those people was known to some engineers before 1986, and it was ignored, buried, treated as a state secret. After the disaster, every reactor of that type was modified so it could never happen again. The fix came, too late for Pripyat. Some say Chernobyl helped bring down the Soviet Union itself. The disaster laid bare, to Soviet citizens themselves, just how much the system had been lying to them. Trust cracked. And cracks like that, in history, tend to spread. But the most important legacy isn't political. It's human. It's the act of Anatoly and the firefighters who climbed onto that roof knowing, on some level, that they might not come down. It's the choice to run toward danger so that others wouldn't have to. They weren't superheroes. They were men in their early 20s with families at home. And when the siren rang, they went. Without proper gear, without complete information, without understanding the invisible enemy they faced. They went because it was their job, because it was the right thing to do. That fire on the roof, put out by men with no protection, kept the flames from reaching the neighboring reactors. Had they spread, the catastrophe would have been far greater. The sacrifice of those first firefighters, we now know, protected a number of lives we'll never be able to calculate. The 3 who dove into the basement to open the valves. The miners who dug beneath the reactor. The pilots who flew over the open core. The biorobots with their 90 seconds. Each of them faced a danger they couldn't see, smell, or touch, and went anyway. That's why we treat this story with respect and not like a horror film. Because behind every number there is a name. A mother waiting for her son to come home from his shift. A wife who traveled to Moscow to stay by her husband's side until the end. Real people, not characters. Pripyat endures as an accidental museum of the day the 20th century collided with its own limits. The photos of the city, the rusted Ferris wheel, the furniture blanketed in moss, travel the world because they say something words can't. Here, life stopped from one moment to the next. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of Chernobyl. The technology humanity builds is only as safe as the honesty of the people who operate it. The atom didn't fail on its own. What failed was the silence, the pride, and the haste. The reactor only obeyed the laws of physics that were always there. Today, part of the plant itself has already been partially dismantled, and the zone is studied by scientists from all over the world as a living laboratory on radiation, nature, and resilience. From the worst nuclear disaster in history, humanity is still learning. The RBMK reactors that remained were corrected. Nuclear safety standards changed across the entire planet. The culture of absolute secrecy was exposed to the world. Chernobyl, in the end, taught through tragedy what should have been heard in silence years before. When you think of Chernobyl, remember the numbers: the 30 immediate dead, the thousands of cancers, the hundreds of thousands left homeless. But remember the face, too. The firefighter in his early 20s who climbed into a truck before dawn, not knowing, to face the invisible. If this story moved you, do one thing for me. Comment down below on what struck you most: the firefighters with no protection, the elephant's foot, the abandoned city, or the wildlife that came back. And if you like history told with seriousness and with respect for those who lived it, subscribe to World and Stories. Because the world is full of stories like this one that deserve to be remembered as they truly were. On that April night before dawn, ordinary men ran toward what no one understood so that the rest of us could wake up the next day. May we never forget the names behind the number. Until the next story.